first speaker is a sophomore from New York studying economics and history in the College of Arts and Sciences. He's a member of the Fulton Debating Society, and he participated in a public debate at the Norfolk State Prison last semester, which will serve as the basis of his talk. Please welcome Kelvin Lin.
So my topic today will be on the United States criminal justice system and why it's important to us, as well as our perception of it. To begin, I'd like to start off with the two R's, which I think are the most important part of the criminal justice system: rehabilitation versus retribution. So when I was a freshman in high school, this was the debate topic that I had, and I had no idea how these terms were in conflict in the beginning, but this actually plays a huge role in the criminal justice system. It's not that these two terms are so different, it's the priority that each government puts on one term over the other. So countries like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark will put a priority on rehabilitation over retribution. They tend to have low recidivism rates, and they tend to place a huge emphasis on allowing these the citizens and prisoners to reintegrate back in society. In comparison, the United States in recent years has seen a trend towards retribution and punishment, and that's why we have high recidivism rates. Now I'll give an introduction on the prison system. To begin, this is a chart showing the United States prison population in comparison to other countries. So the United States has the most amount of incarcerated people out of any country. They have 2.2 million people incarcerated, and their jail occupancy levels are 107.6. And this is a growing problem. There's a huge amount of people that are incarcerated, and the amount of people that are incarcerated goes up. But one key thing here has to be with the reason why these people are imprisoned. So it's natural to find a link between the people, the crime rate and the people that are imprisoned. Here's a chart showing the United States violent crime rate over the past 60 or so years. As you can see, from 1960 to 1992, the amount of violent crimes being committed went up drastically. And you can assume from this part of the chart that the amount of people in prison should have went up as well. And this is only something natural to see. As you can see after 1994, that the amount of people that are committing violent crimes went down drastically. So if we're looking at the amount of people incarcerated, it should mirror this chart. The amount of people incarcerated should go up from 1960 to 1992, and then it should dip back down. Here's a more in-depth chart showing the period from 1992 to 2012. As you can see here, across the board, violent crimes, murders, and non-negligent manslaughters, forcible rapes, robberies, aggravated assaults, and property crimes all went down. So from this period, we can assume that the amount of people in prison should have went down. But that's not the case. In fact, if you look at this chart here, what we should have assumed was that the amount of people that were incarcerated should have went up, and then it should have dipped back down. But that's definitely not the case. It's true for the period from 1960 to 1992. We can see that there were 200,000 people incarcerated in 1960, and it dipped all the way up to around 1.2 million in 1992. That was the key, peak amount of crimes being committed. But the chart doesn't dip back down. In fact, it actually grows. You can't really see in this chart too well, but the amount of people incarcerated have went up from 1.2 million, where crimes really started decreasing at an alarming rate, to 2015, where we have 1.4 million people that are incarcerated. So the number hasn't dipped back down, and the chart doesn't show it. But we've seen that the crime rate and the amount of people in prison go hand in hand. So why is this the case? Well, it has to do with drug offenses. 1 in 5 incarcerated people are locked up for a drug offense. This is from the Prison Policy Initiative, and it really does a good job of showing the breakdown of the people that are imprisoned. You can see that drug crimes make up a small amount of state prisons. That's because state prisons are usually more violent crimes, not just simple drug crimes. And it also makes up a good chunk of jails. But if you look at the amount of people that are incarcerated for drug offenses in federal prisons, it makes up about half of that section. And this is a growing problem. This is not something that's going to solve itself. As you can see, from 1980 to 2007, the number of arrests due to drug violations went up dramatically. It went up from 580,900 to 1.8 million in 2007. So this is a growing problem that we have. And this is also a huge issue because of the implications that it has on people that are incarcerated. So as you can see, whites make up 64% of our population, but they only make up 39% of the prison population. Blacks and Latinos make up 13% and 16% respectively, but they make up 40% and 19% of the prison population. The biggest thing here is the intersection between whites and blacks. And all the people that should be in prison, theoretically, that are white, are replaced by people that are black. And this has huge implications for the minorities and the people that make up the prisons. And this also has a big effect on the key concept that we talked about earlier, which is rehabilitation and retribution. We can see from the chart there that the prison system has placed an emphasis in the United States on retribution over rehabilitation if people are being punished at an alarming rate. And this has a huge implication on how people reintegrate back into society. We can see that the amount of people that are in prison continue to grow, and it's hard for them to reintegrate back into society. In fact, there's substantial research from Madriz in 1997, McLean and Herrera in 2006, that we tend to associate criminality with this good or bad dynamic. We look at it like from a purely moral point of view. So, the most common word that undergraduates associated with the word criminal was bad. So we kind of made it like a good versus evil thing. I haven't committed a crime, I'm probably a good person. You've committed a crime, you're a bad person. And this has really bad implications because we also tend to lump them in with stereotypes of low socioeconomic status and minority race when we think of criminals. And when we use the word criminal, we also don't see the types of crimes that they've committed. In fact, the word criminal can be associated with someone that murdered someone, but it can also be associated with someone that committed a minor drug crime. And this also has big implications on how they reintegrate back in society. In fact, multiple research has shown that the perceived stigma is linked to unemployment and income loss, depression, poor social functioning, and negative coping styles. So not only are you imprisoned, and once you're released back in society, it's hard for you to reintegrate, but you're also likely to develop mental illnesses, and you're also likely to have a huge stigma on your back, and no one will be behind you. People will just lump you in with this good-bad dynamic. Now I'll speak about my own personal experience and why my thoughts on the issue have changed over time. Originally, I didn't even know what the words rehabilitation and retribution had to do with the criminal justice system, or what the word recidivism even meant. And my personal experience in Norfolk State Prison dramatically changed how I saw the prison system and the actions that we need to take to correct it. So this past semester, I went to Norfolk State Prison with the Fulton Debating Society. This was the first time that Norfolk State Prison had hosted a public debate in over 50 years. Fun fact, Malcolm X actually went to the Norfolk State Prison, and he described it as one of the most humane prisons he's ever been to, and he felt liberated. So when we went to Norfolk State Prison, I personally didn't have much thoughts on the issue. I thought that Norfolk State Prison was likely to be not that dangerous to be in. It was described as a medium security prison, and I didn't know what the difference was between low security, medium security, or maximum security prisons. I thought that medium security prisons would be filled with people that had committed crimes, obviously to a degree that they should be imprisoned at a pretty high level, but not the crimes that I would eventually find these prisoners had committed. When we went in, we came in a group of 5. I went with 4 teammates from my debate team, and we debated against 5 prisoners on the opposing side, and we debated on the issue of global warming. When we were talking to them afterwards, they told us that they were really happy about this because they had nothing to do in prison, and all they've been doing was to prepare for this event because there's nothing to do in prison. Here's a picture of the Norfolk State Prison. So when we entered in, it was kind of a shocking experience. When I went in, we were told to remove our watches. We weren't allowed to wear ties because the prisoners couldn't wear ties. And we were told to leave our jackets in lockers and put away all of our possessions before we went in. When we went in, we could only go in with groups of 5. So I was separated from my team, and I went with 4 Toastmaster judges. The Toastmaster judges were the people that were judging the debate. And when I was talking to one of the Toastmaster judges, she asked me, "How are you feeling about the situation?" And I told her, I don't really know what to expect. And she was like, "Oh, good," because I was scared shitless when I went in the first time. So so that kind of changed my opinion on it, and I was a little more scared now. But I didn't even find out the crimes that the prisoners I had debated against committed until afterwards. So we received a pamphlet after the debates with all of their names, and I was just looking through them, and I was really curious. I saw James Keown, George Vicente, Ronald Lethwich, and Michael Phillips. And I didn't know what types of crimes they had committed. But there was one prisoner that sort of surprised me because a couple of years ago when I was 10 years old, I watched a 2020 documentary, and there was a very gruesome death. Someone had killed their wife with antifreeze, and they were very successful. They had went to Harvard Business School, although they forged it. They had went to Harvard Business School, and they just seemed like they had the perfect life. But they had killed their wife with antifreeze. And when I was going in, I saw someone, and for some reason, I felt like I had seen this person before. And that person turned out to be James Keown. James Keown was described to be truly in the presence of an evil person. He was the evil person. And when I had met him, and when I had met the 300 prisoners that were watching the debate, I had no idea. When I talked to every single one of them, they just seemed like normal people to me. I could not tell that they were prisoners. There's no difference between them and anyone in this crowd that I would talk to after this speech. There's no way of telling whether or not they're truly evil or a prisoner. And this is not even the worst crime that was committed. Ronald Leftwich killed a man over a dispute with his girlfriend. Michael Phillips was convicted for second-degree murder, and there was one person that kind of encapsulates the whole rehabilitation versus retribution debate, and that person is George Vicente. George Vicente went into prison in 1977 for torturing and raping an elderly woman. When he was released around 18 years later in 1995, he was taken in by a priest who said, "I will change this person, I'll make his life better, I'll try to rehabilitate him." He ended up killing the priest, and he was sent back to prison, and he would serve the rest of his days in Norfolk State Prison, life in prison. And there's a key implication that we have to take out of this, and that has to do with recidivism. There are people like George Vicente reintegrating back into society every single day. Whether we like it or not, people like George Vicente are being released every day. And the crimes that they committed may be worse on a moral, or they just might be worse crimes in general. And we have to accept that. And the fact that these people are being released every single day means we have to take a stance on whether or not we're prioritizing rehabilitation or retribution. Would you rather these prisoners who were sent to prison and are released to learn from their crimes, or would you rather allow them to see punishment and commit the crime again? Obviously, the best option would be to rehabilitate these criminals. So when they are eventually released back into society, they don't commit the crime again. And recidivism is the third R. As I mentioned earlier, there are three fundamental R's that make up the criminal justice system. The first two R's were rehabilitation and retribution. And the third R, probably the most important R, is recidivism. Recidivism, it refers to a person's relapse into criminal behavior. That means when I'm released from prison and there are low recidivism rates, then I'm not likely to commit my crime again. But the Bureau of Justice shows that in the United States, inmates released from state prisons have a 5-year recidivism rate of 76.6%. That means when prisoners are released from state prisons, which I described earlier as generally more violent, filled with criminals and violent criminals, they generally commit their crime 76.6% of the time. They commit a worse crime, and they're sent straight back into prison. That's a very alarming number, especially given the fact that we can do so much better. Norway has a 22% recidivism rate. Prisoners ski, cook, they play tennis, and they play cards. And personal criminals from Norway would describe the prisons as one of the most humane prisons in the world. In fact, prisons in the country are small. Most house fewer than 50 people, and some just a handful. They spread all over the country, and these prisons mirror the outside world. When we look at prisons in the United States, they look nothing like the outside world. You're just trapped in a cell. You're restricted of all of your freedom. You're not given the ability to do any activities. You actually lose the right to vote many of the time. And you're basically are limited in the recreational activities that you can do. But in Norway, it seems like the opposite. If we inflict harsher punishments, then they're not likely to commit their crime again. Norway shows the opposite. They have the most humane conditions in the world for their prisons, and their prisons often mirror the outside world. So it's so easy to reintegrate back into society once you've committed your crime. And ultimately, this comes down to the initial question, rehabilitation versus retribution. It's clear that we don't have to inflict harsh punishments in order to get criminals not to commit the same crime again. People like George Vicente, who killed a priest and who had raped an elderly woman, are being released back in society every single day. The fact that they're released back in society every single day means that we have to understand, as a country, what stance we'll take. Are we going to rehabilitate criminals like that, or are we going to punish them severely and hope that they won't commit the crime again? I personally believe that we should rehabilitate these criminals and allow them to become functioning members of society. I hope that this talk was useful in informing you about the prison system and helping you develop a stance on this issue. And I hope you all learned a lot about this. Thank you.